Hey everyone, welcome to the Lit in Space podcast. This is Alessio, founder of Kernel Labs, and I'm joined by Swigs, editor of Lit in Space.
Hello, hello. And today we have Ian Webster from Promptfoo with us. Welcome.
Hey guys, good to be here. Definitely excited.
Yeah, I first came across you when you submitted a proposal for AI World's Fair last year, and then shortly after you started, spinning out Promptfoo into its own company. You just announced your Series A, 18 million with Insight Partners and Andreessen Horowitz. What's the journey been like? Tell us about your journey.
It was kind of crazy. I have always been an engineer because I love building things, and I've had successful open source projects in the past, but this is by far and away the one that has gone the farthest, right? So I started Promptfoo open source while I was at Discord. And at Discord, I joined Discord in 2020 and started the developer platform organization essentially. And then when AI got hot, I switched over to kind of leading some of Discord's AI efforts. So it was really through the pain of having to ship AI to 200 million teenagers that I realized there's definitely something here, both in terms of evaluation and then also risk management.
Yeah, and just as a side, Lit in Space obviously runs on Discord as well. Obviously we're very interested in AI. Clyde has been an interesting journey for Discord. I don't know if you want to comment on what you did with Clyde or what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I led Clyde basically, and I guess for those who don't know or haven't followed, Clyde was like an AI chatbot on Discord. Kind of what you expected. And it was in the heyday of GPT 3.5, right? So everyone was like, let's do a chatbot. For Discord, in my opinion, it actually makes sense, right? Because chatbots and Discord. The interesting thing about Clyde was that it wasn't really meant to be necessarily a helpful bot, but instead more of a social bot, like a bot that would just be in your channel and help people interact and that kind of thing. So yeah, we built out that concept that I feel like since then has kind of been carried forward by Character AI and a handful of companies in that vein.
XAI.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
Shapes was big. Discord has been cracking down on Shapes. You don't have to comment on that. But anyway, so was that the main AI effort? Were there other AI efforts that I maybe don't know about? What was your experience that you're drawing from to make Promptfoo?
Yeah, there were others. I think the ones that are probably most visible are AI summaries, which appear on certain large channel traffic channels, as well as there was some stuff on the customer support side, I think. And I'm by the way, I'm long gone from Discord, so I'm probably free to I don't know anything that shouldn't be said publicly or anything like that, and I don't have any context on the Shape stuff.
Yeah, cool. So we can dive right into Promptfoo. So started as a kind of a eval testing toolkit. Has broadened out into the broader sort of security problem. Maybe let's get we'll start from what it is today, and then you can fill in any history you need in a crisp way. What is Promptfoo?
Yeah, so Promptfoo is a way to find and fix issues or risks in your AI application. So we have these days primarily a security focus, or at least that's our go-to-market. But we're also just a very popular open source evals tool. And as you mentioned, we originally started as an evals tool. And I can fill in a little bit of context there. The inspiration from Promptfoo came from basically we shipped this thing, we YOLO'd this thing to a couple million users, and then we quickly found, especially because this was before GPT-4 was economical, we quickly found that you would pull on one end and something drastic would change on the other. And I spent so long trying to get it to basically talk casually instead of an LLM. So it quickly became apparent I needed to do something systematic here. I needed something for the team to do that. So that's why I started building Promptfoo. The inspiration came from actually 13 years ago in my Google days. I used to work on improving search. And when you had a change to propose to the algorithm or whatever, the way that it would be evaluated is it would go to a bunch of evaluators and it would come back as this really ugly table with column A and column B, and you compare the two. We called them side by sides. So all I wanted every day was just like a side by side for what we were working on at Discord. And that, that was even before like the term evals was coined or popular. Like I remember having to explain to people what Promptfoo was, even though I'm sure like the ML people have been doing evals forever. But I guess the point is I just wanted like a super easy side-by-side interface. And that's how it started. And it just kind of grew and evolved from there.
What were the initial maybe forks? You could have gone a lot of different ways, right? Now you ended up with security as the main go-to-market. Are there other branches of the story that maybe you didn't go through that you found interesting, or any other kind of like idea maze exploration stories?
The obvious fork here was, do I lean into being an eval tool and maybe an observability tool, or do I find something else to do? And I think like there was a bunch that went into that decision, but in my opinion, the main thing that really drove it for me was that I think evals are table stakes. I think that they're a commodity and everyone should be doing them. And yes, there are companies that are doing great in the eval space, but to me, it just seemed like a bloodbath. Like we would just had a great start with Promptfoo, and we would have just been fighting on like feature parity, tit for tat until the end of time, going enterprise by enterprise, and just like that's a long slog. Not that what I chose isn't a slog, but it sounded better to me.
It's a different slog.
Yeah, a different slog. I thought to myself, what is the best? Like, what do I see people doing with evals that has the most value to the organization? And the security safety component, I think, was like a very obvious choice.
And then there's kind of the question in security of like security because of the model, security because of your prompt, and kind of like the way you're maybe, executing prompts and things like that. How did you think about that? I think initially there was like this whole like toxicity and like all these different kind of like base evals that people run, but obviously the model providers themselves ended up mostly fixing the problem in the models. How did you think about what is kind of something that is worth for you to build versus, hey, it's just going to be fixed upstream?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, there are two buckets, right? There are like the foundation risks, which is toxicity and stuff like that. And then there are the application risks, which are all the ways that you can shoot yourself in the foot, like by for example, not adding proper access control to your RAG. So like it can access documents that you shouldn't have access to, or giving agent tools or API capabilities that again don't have proper access controls, or can do undesirable things. I always tell people like, OpenAI and Anthropic, they have teams of geniuses who are working on making sure that models aren't toxic and that kind of thing, but they can't. Well, the flippant way to say it is like, you can't fix stupid. I don't think like the people who are necessarily testing this are stupid, but like everyone makes mistakes, and that's what a lot of security is built around, or a lot of the cybersecurity industry is built around. And there have been many like pretty high profile instances of this. So yeah, I'm a lot more interested in what happens at the interface between the application and the model and what can go wrong there. And I think definitely in the fullness of time, that's where this domain is most interesting by far. There's a kind of middle ground as well, which is there's like a slight difference in incentives between the application developer and these foundation labs, which is that OpenAI, Anthropic, everyone else, they're all building models that are like maximally helpful. And in actually most cases in a corporate environment, you don't want that to be maximum. You don't want the model to be like helpful in every way possible. So in between toxicity and this application risk, or like hard technical security risks, there are softer but still relevant risks. Like, healthcare companies don't want their bots to recommend off-label drug use, or people don't, I guess a boring example is like people don't want their bots recommending competitors, stuff like that, where there actually is a delta that you have to test.
Yeah, perhaps we I don't know if you want to, it's time to go for a demo. We tested the screen share capabilities. Is there any place that you recommend starting for trying stuff out?
Yeah, I definitely can do that. I'd be happy to. So, I have kind of walk you through how Promptfoo works, and tell me if this is like too in the weeds.
Nothing's too in the weeds.
Okay, let's
especially for like a developer tool for like that crosses AI and security. Like we are the perfect podcast for it.
tell me if this is too not in the weeds then. But basically, like I'll walk through what Promptfoo does under the hood, and as well as like what the setup looks like and what you get out of it. But basically, when you use Promptfoo, you bring two things: obviously the target application or model, as well as information about the application use case and that kind of thing. So the target configuration is very straightforward. Like most people are hitting an HTTP endpoint, but it can also hook directly into like your Python, your JavaScript, whatever. And we have support for 50 different inference providers. So that's like the boring part. I guess the more interesting and like much more impactful part is information that you provide that's relevant to the purpose of the application and its business context and so forth. So we ask people to when I talk with people about how to use Promptfoo, we ask you to fill out as much of this as possible, because this is all going to have pretty substantial downstream effects on everything else that happens. So you tell them, you enter in here, like, what's the purpose of your application, et cetera? What should it and should it not have access to? Is there any additional business context? Is there like a type of user or persona that the attacker should imitate, and so forth? And maybe before I go further, like I probably should have backed up a second and just explained high level. The way that Promptfoo works is by using AI versus AI, in the sense that we generate attacks that are tailored toward your application, your business context, in order to find things that you are worried about, or in order to find potential risks. So this is like distinct from having a static vulnerability database, for example, or just like a list of 1,000 canned prompt injections that we send through. Everything is kind of generated on the fly. And that's what makes it like useful and relevant to application security teams. So any questions so far? Like, is this the right level of detail for you guys?
Yeah. One question: how does the discover button work? Like when you were running through this, kind of makes sense that if I give you the website, you should be able to infer most of these things. Is that something that people use? Are you happy with how good the models are at kind of like pre-filling these things, or is there still a lot of context that the users go in and input manually?
Yeah, honestly, I think I always encourage people to fill it in manually whenever they can. And the reason for that is the people who built the system, as well as the security guys, they have a whole lot more context than what could be discovered on the fly through the front door. So if you're doing a black box test, like you just give it an HTTP endpoint, the most that we can do from a discovery perspective is just like talk directly to the application, which maybe we can enumerate some functionality or guess at the underlying tools and so forth. But the team that actually did the implementation is going to know a lot better. So I think that part is pretty important. There's some nuance here. So if your application has tracing, like if it can export to an OpenTelemetry sync, then we can learn a lot more about the application. I think the other thing is if you are testing an MCP client or server, we can do the like list tools on MCP to get more information about that as well. But I would say the majority of people approach this as like a black box test, which is actually not the best approach in my opinion. I think especially where things are headed, like with more complex RAGs and agents and so forth, you're going to have some type of observability or like internal tracing in order to do meaningful automated red teaming. Yeah, I guess with that said, so the next step is to choose what we call plugins. So plugins are basically different risk areas. We have over 100 of them at this point. They're built on top of either uncensored models or, for some proportion of them, off-the-shelf models. Really depends on which risk areas you're focused on. And these plugins produce application-specific attack objectives. So we have a bunch of presets out of the box. On the security side, we see a lot of people caring about the OWASP LM top 10. And then in the US, to a lesser extent, we see people caring about NIST. And of course, the EU people are interested in the EU AI Act. And then the areas that you can cover are broken down into 4 sections. There's like straight up technical security risks. There's compliance and legal. So I guess things that you can get in trouble for potentially. And then softer trust and safety, toxicity issues, as well as brand or reputational risks like hallucination. And we also have a handful of domain-specific risks. I'm sharing the open source right now. In the open source, we have them specifically for finance and healthcare. So that's the gist of it. These attack objectives, and I can show you what an example looks like.
Just because you have that on screen, you should also probably share that you're a member of the OWASP committee.
Yeah, there are a handful of like OWASP groups or committees that are focused on certain issues, and I was an author on the OWASP Gen AI Red Teaming Guide for what it's worth. So, I think it's actually a pretty decent guide. The problem with these standards is that things are changing, daily, but like a lot of the guidance is incomplete in a 3 to 6 month time frame. So yeah, OWASP came out with their first LM top 10 last year. They had to update it in January. I imagine it's going to be updated again. So one of the issues is that the space is moving pretty fast. Yeah. So, and the way that plugins work is that everything is based on the application details that you've entered. So if I put in like customer, or I can put in whatever you guys come up with, but I can do like customer support chatbot for mobile banking, or if you have any suggestions, I can do that too. And then I can roll the dice here. I'm always nervous because this is like on the fly, but it's already talking about like pins and transaction data, etc. So this is just like a one-off example, right? We normally would put in a lot more information here, but you get the idea. Like the attacks that these plugins, or the objectives that these plugins generate, are very much tailored toward the use case. And then from there, these get fed into what we call strategies, which are basically different attack methods. So most of these strategies come out of published ML research, and then we tweak them or we build on top of them in order to make them like actually effective on application use cases, because most of the research is done focused on foundation models. So we kind of modify a lot of these optimization or search strategies to bring in that application or that business context and use it accordingly. And this is an oversimplification, but typically there's an attacker LLM that communicates directly with a target application, and then a judge which looks at the outputs and is like, well, that got blocked by guardrails for this reason, so let's tweak it. And this loop can run 100 or 1,000 times per attack objective. So that's kind of what the configuration looks like in a nutshell. Any questions here? Making sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense. One question on how you keep track of all the papers and like research and whatnot. Have you figured out some easy way to do it? Or how do you, given that you're spending some time to make it better for your use case, like how do you figure out what is worth adding, what is not worth it? Like, do you have a team internally that kind of takes care of that?
Yeah, it's basically a lot of Google Scholar alerts. That's like the main thing there. And the team here is still really small. We're just like 12 people. So I wouldn't say I have a team internally, but like we all keep an eye on it. And there's a lot of research coming out in this space. There are probably 5 to 10 papers per week. So it's pretty noisy. And it's become very easy to just like publish, quote unquote, something around just like a random jailbreak that you found. So we quickly stopped incorporating just like any jailbreak that made it onto that someone decided to kind of like dress up. But if like a new fundamental technique or approach comes along, we'll take it, we'll try to reproduce it, and then we will eval it against like actual real world application use cases.
Cool. All right. So now I set up my whole app. You have decided which ones are the things to care about, and then from here you go into the run.
Yeah, from here you run it. So I I guess I configured this against a dummy endpoint. Maybe I won't do a live run, but I do have a couple. Yeah, let's just see what happens if we click run now. I guess I did fill out all the information. So it's going to basically go through this process where we generate and then we eval. The way to think about this, I guess, for the ML audience is we're just a synthetic data generator for your eval test set. That's actually what like the Promptfoo security red teaming solution is. And then, like, long story short, this will take, depending on the size of the run as well as your like throughput on your application, maybe it takes 20 minutes, and then you wind up with a report that looks like this. So in this particular case, we're red teaming a customer support chatbot for a hypothetical bank. We had 27,000 conversations with it, and you wind up with basically this report card across a bunch of different areas: security, compliance, trust and safety, and brand. You can click into these and see some inputs that were flagged. So I think this chatbot was built on top of 4.0 or something like that. So there are some kind of like jailbreaky sounding things that look like this. And I guess I would point out that there's always an application specific ask here. And then we also, depending on the attacks that you've chosen, we also have kind of like longer form attacks where the attacker starts out with like an innocent question and then slowly over 10, 20 back and forths leads the LM down a path toward where it is more vulnerable or more willing to like give you what you want. So in this case, this was built on top of a RAG with mock medical data, and we were able to extract some pH. So this is what it looks like in a nutshell. I will also say, like, under the hood, it's all in eval, right? So I can show you the really ugly eval view that I dreamed of back at Discord that I wished that I had, if it loads. But yeah, you can see all the results here, and this is kind of the less the report view is like, the report card is like eye candy, but this is the operational view, the thing that people like actually use to understand what is going on and how it's working. Hopefully that's helpful. That's what Promptfoo is in a nutshell.
Yeah. What do people do from here? So you're saying basically my app sucks. There's like a lot of security issues. What's the next step?
Yeah. So there are, when you have a finding, there are certain things that you can do, obviously, depending on the finding. But the list is honestly not that long in Gen AI. If it's a foundation issue, you can harden the prompt. You can tune your guardrails or like implement a guardrail. And we have a guardrail solution that is trained by these red team findings. But honestly, like, no matter the guardrail, you'll probably have to do some tuning. And then if it's like an API or access control issue, then you just have to fix your shit. Like there's no amount of prompt hardening or whatever that's gonna be acceptable in that sort of situation. So in our commercial version, like, a lot of large companies are like, okay, I have all these problems. What do I do now? In our commercial version, we have a like remediation path. So we tell you, like, okay, for this one, here's how you update your prompt. Or if you're using such and such guardrail, like, here's what we recommend tuning it with. And I know you can also, like, you can fine tune models and that kind of thing. But for most of the teams that, like, at big companies right now, your options for remediation are pretty limited.
It's like, what type of companies resonating the most? Like, I think, like, it depends, obviously, the scale of the app that you're running against, and also like the resources that they have to dedicate it to this. And I think like security sales is like a very hard sale, something that historically I haven't been involved in. And I always think, like, to some extent, like, it's kind of like fear-based marketing, because I guess, like, there's some legal liability, but really it's just like, there's the never-ending list of issues, right? Like I'll never be done fixing security bugs because there's so much.
Yeah, security is in a strange place right now because you have all this top-down pressure to like AI everything, right? Even at the world's largest companies, there's some board level initiative that's like, do more AI. And a lot of security teams are like flying blind, or they're scrambling to catch up. We are actually seeing the most commercial traction from basically the world's largest companies, like, Fortune 500 types. And I think the reason for that is that those are the guys with the most to lose. If you're a startup building on AI, like you're going to ship it no matter what, right? Like you're probably not going to take time to red team and to come up with a guardrail solution that like has a feedback loop from the red teaming, et cetera, et cetera. So I've noticed this resonates mostly with like household name brands. Essentially, we have a bit over 10% of the Fortune 500 that use Promptfoo right now. I expect that number is going to continue to grow pretty substantially because this is basically an initiative at every single one of those companies. And just to add on, I think you're right that like a lot of cybersecurity stuff traditionally is a fear-based sell. I try to be a little careful with that because security people by nature, they tend to be very skeptical people and very skeptical of people trying to sell them things just because cybersecurity is like so built on top of, or like there's so many vendors in cyber and there's so much snake oil and smoke and mirrors in cybersecurity and in AI. When you put them together, I don't think selling on fear alone works very well. That's why I think open source has been really good for us because there's so many people selling stuff that maybe doesn't really exist or doesn't really work in this space. Whereas you can npm install Promptfoo right now and like start doing this stuff, and it's pretty clear we have something that's real and something that's effective. So that's been my number one way to like get in the door or get in the good graces of folks who are doing work in this space.
What's the kind of like open source to enterprise jump mostly? Like, do people get most of the features in open source and then it's more about the cloud management, or how does that work?
Yeah, so everything I showed you is in open source. The way that I think about it is that if you're at a big company, finding the issue is only like 20% of the challenge. And then the rest is you have to triage it, you have to like hook it into your task tracker and your SIM and like all these other systems. You have to monitor it, you have to remediate it, you have to validate the remediation. So there's a very long list of things that are required to complete the full vulnerability management lifecycle. And that's what we focus on the enterprise side. So I definitely, we have all the enterprise readiness bells and whistles, like the compliance certifications and SSO and RBAC and professional services, that type of stuff. I didn't want to build a company on top of just like support and services, pretty much. So focused on the vulnerability cycle.
Alessio, how do you think about the landscape of tools you see? Like, how does Promptfoo kind of fit in the overall trends that customers are wanting?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is kind of like a new area altogether. I think like a lot of what we're seeing got a lot of adoption is like using AI to change the shape of all security tools. So we have one company, Sublime Security, that does email security. And it used to be that, Proofpoint and all these tools have like these black box models that do detection for you. And what Sublime did is they have a DSL where you can write custom rules, and then you can use, because it's code, the AI can help you write rules in real time. So whenever a new vulnerability is out, you can like in real time write a rule for it in your system. Same thing is happening with Push Security, which is like a identity access security company. So we're seeing less almost of like securing the AI itself. I think that that's still like an area that people are trying to figure out what to deploy. So it's almost like trailing. I think MCP security is one space where we're seeing a lot of things because I think it kind of makes sense to people, which is like, okay, I'm just making sure that this connector that used to be an API that is now an MCP server is secure the right way. I think that makes a lot of sense. Threat hunting is another space where AI is having a lot of success. Like how do you use AI to like threat hunt? AI SOC is another one. We have Dropzone that it's growing really fast. How do you use AI to like get through all the notifications? Because this is similar in a way to what you see in Promptfoo, which is like there's like a lot of things that can go wrong, but then there's a limited amount of ways to fix them. So AI is actually pretty good at like matching the issues to the fixes and help you navigate through them. So, but yeah, in this space, we haven't seen as much. And I think that's why, Ian is getting so much adoption, which is like a lot of the tools that we've seen in the first wave, like, I'm not going to name some of these companies, but they were maybe like, hey, we'll secure AI, they raise 30, 40, 50 million. And then you kind of get there and it's like, how exactly do you secure the AI? And it's more top down versus, I think Ian's approach of being bottoms up is like the security team and the engineering team can work together to fix this because you have specific issues and you have ways to implement it in the code. Versus, I think the first approach was like, hey, we'll be top down, maybe we'll be a proxy on top of your LLM. So instead of like looking at your code, we'll kind of take all the prompts that come to you and like take a first look at them. I think that obviously didn't work for clear reasons, but I'm curious, Ian, what you're seeing of like what tools you're ripping out, like what people tried before that didn't work. Obviously, you don't have to name specifics unless you want to. We're always open for hot takes.
Security for AI is pretty greenfield. So most of the people who are bringing Promptfoo are not replacing anything. It's just like that's part of what makes this such like it's the reason why investors are excited about this opportunity, right? Because it's like a whole new category in cybersecurity, which you don't really like that doesn't come around very often. So it's a competitive space, but not so much because of incumbents, but actually just because there are a bunch of other startups in this area, because like people have felt the pain and recognize the opportunity. I guess like in the first wave, I agree. Everyone was focused on guardrails because it fit the mold of what people were used to, kind of like a WAF style thing. There are a lot of really big security companies that made their fortunes on having like a network or point of presence and that kind of thing. But like people are realizing that there's no such thing as a perfect guardrail, and there are so many projects that are blocked at huge companies because it's not like palatable to say, okay, we know this has serious issues, but like, fuck it, we'll do it live. The guardrail will catch it, and we'll just pray to I don't know, the guardrail gods that they'll do it. So like this year, basically, people have realized that, oh, we need something pre-deployment that can actually measure the risk and allow us to manage that risk. And I think that's where startups can get more involved. I know that there were a lot of guardrail startups, or there still are, I guess, but building a business on guardrails really scares me because there are so many incumbents that can come in and eat your lunch. And it's like, it's not actually that hard to build a guardrail. I don't know if I'm going to make people angry by saying that. Maybe some of my competitors, but like, I think guardrails are a commodity, as evidenced by the fact that like 95% of the people that we work with are just using whatever guardrail comes from their inference provider, like Bedrock guardrails or Azure Content Filter or whatever. So the future is really like not in runtime, but earlier in the software development lifecycle, ideally in CI/CD or before that. Where Promptfoo sits right now is developers can run it as a CLI, or you can bake it into CI/CD as a sort of regression test. But I actually think, like, so I think that's where we're doing very well today. I kind of think that is going to stop working, or it will stop being enough, as I mentioned earlier, because of the complexity of like agents and some RAGs. So like what we're seeing now is like we've encountered some agents that just like kick off and run for half an hour, right? And like how can you do a good job testing and validating its security if all you're doing is talking through the front door, right? Like in the chat input and looking at the output. So that's maybe a long-winded answer, but I don't even think Promptfoo as it exists today is going to be adequate in the future, which is obviously what we're working on internally, is like, what does it look like to actually do security for agents? And yeah, we have a bunch of ideas there, but the very short way to summarize it is like that security tooling needs to be closer to developers as opposed to kind of after the fact.
Yeah, I feel like a few people have exploited this observation in the pre-Gen AI era, and I'm curious if there's sort of any role models that like come to mind that like I'm definitely learning about the space as we talk about this. But yeah, I mean, like basically, do you want to see this as an IDE plugin, or like like how extreme close to developer can you get?
Yeah, so I want to do an IDE plugin. We're experimenting with some of that, and then also something that's more code aware. Like I want you to be able to hook it up to GitHub and get a little more insight that way. So not exactly like static code scanning, but I mean, Alessio asked about the like that discovery process right now. I think that discovery can go a lot deeper. It should be code aware, and things like that. That's the sort of stuff that we're working on.
What else? So you had I saw the MCP proxy thing. What's interesting there? I would say the questions that people have today is context, exfiltration through MCPs, taking bad actions, so destroying things accidentally. What are like the different attack vectors, maybe that you see, the failure cases? What are people trying?
Yeah. So Promptfoo has offensive testing capabilities around basically everything that you outlined, like the different threat scenarios. So there's scenario number one. Well, here, let me just show you. I don't think this is gonna shock you or anyone who sees this, but this is basically how we think about it. So we see a lot of people obviously just like building internal use cases on top of MCP, where you have a trusted first-party client and a server. And that's pretty straightforward. And we just want to make sure that their MCP server, like they didn't naively wrap an API and it can leak an API key or pitfalls like that. I think definitely becomes more interesting when you're in an untrusted environment. So we have dealt with a handful of cases where obviously you have like the rogue or evil MCP server that can tool inject or kind of man in the middle tool calls in a sense. And that's something that I think is like a pretty fundamental problem for some of the use cases that people are trying to develop MCP for. But we have our own, or Promptfoo can simulate that rogue server. So you just kind of point it at your server and we test that. And then Promptfoo can also talk MCP directly and just send JSON into the MCP server, which in my opinion is like, I don't know how useful of an exercise, or like it basically reduces to API fuzzing.
Yeah, MCP key security is API security, right?
Yeah. So that's what, I struggle with this sometimes talking with people on the security side, because like a lot of it's kind of a lot of what they know already. And I know that MCP can be much more, but the way that a lot of corporates are implementing MCP is just like a glorified API wrapper, not like super innovative, just kind of checking the box. So we have these offensive testing capabilities, and then Alessio, as you mentioned, we also have an MCP proxy, which does a couple things. It provides some observability, and there's an MCP server that's essentially a forward proxy, and then it also containerizes MCP servers, so you can control for a given server what it has access to on the file system, or like which network hosts can it speak to, and that kind of thing. And that's it's us branching onto the defensive side as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's not a lot of usage of any of the other primitives outside of tools in servers. I've been building this MCP client called kernel gem, and we support the registry and blah, blah, blah. And most of the servers are just a couple tool calls. They don't really do anything else. So I'm curious, like, I think resources is like another attack vector that people are going to be used more of, which I think people don't do today. Yeah, because that happens, like, the resource gets loaded before the inference gets run, so to speak. So it just gets moved in whatever runtime you have before it gets done. I'm curious how that's going to be secure more. Sampling is another one. So the LLMs can take the server can load data and then run inference before it returns to your main inference flow. And that's another thing where the user doesn't even see really what happens there. You just get the final result. So yeah, it's a curious space to be in. Yeah, right now it's like a API wrapper.
I will also add, one thing I've observed in the real world is the thing that drives security people crazy is that is local MCP specifically, right? So in order to even do a set up an MCP proxy and have a centralized observability and control that, you need to prevent people from just like NPX running their own stuff locally, which I know, like, to us, it's like, oh my God, why would you do that? Because that's like one of the joys about the MCP ecosystem right now is you can throw in whatever you want. But if you imagine if you're like a corporation with 100,000 employees, that's probably not something that would be okay. So they're trying to figure out how to do that first, let alone whether an MCP proxy or like how to centralize that, whether that makes sense.
Yeah. Are you doing the hosting for the MPX one? That's one thing that I've done this with E2B instead. So we have MPX servers too, like this one, and then we just spin up a E2B sandbox and run it in there, and then it's like paired per user. Each user gets a sandbox, and then you can kind of mix and match. This is like a remote one, and then you can match them together. Most people that I talk to, especially in larger enterprises, are like, I don't really know if I want you to do that. I maybe want to own like the runtime. So I'm curious what you hear on the proxy side too.
Yeah, for the really big companies, something like this would probably have to be on-prem, at least in my experience, just because you can get caught up in security reviews and stuff like that for like quarters on end. So yeah, a lot of people are not. On-prem is its own special type of headache. But right now it's still early days. Like that's kind of the first thing that I'm seeing people look for, is something that they can control like within their own environment.
Yep. What else? You have LM security database. You got a lot of cool things that maybe are not the main course, so to speak. What else you want to highlight?
Probably nothing else I want to highlight. I think the red teaming is the main highlight. And I guess I would, if I could like give people a takeaway, it's that if you're worried about controlling risk in your generative AI applications or features, then it makes sense to be able to measure that risk early on before deployment, basically as early as possible. So if you can run tests after you have developed the product, but before you promote it to production, that's great. But ideally, you bring it into your CI/CD and have that sort of assurance like on the PR itself or otherwise earlier in the process. That's just kind of my 2 cents, or like this is the horse that I'm beating every day. But it seems like at a lot of big companies, this is becoming a hard requirement for Gen AI.
Well, awesome. Well, people should get in touch. I assume you're also hiring. Any other final calls to action?
Yeah, that's a good point. We are hiring basically across the board. So if securing AI or making AI behave properly is something or behave improperly, I guess is technically what we do on the red teaming side. If any of that is interesting to you, would love to talk. So please get in touch.
Awesome, Ian. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.